Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about the Olympic Games of Twilight of the Republic, where I'm going to be ranking the top 3 of all the best cards in the set for each aspect combinations. You guys really enjoyed this format of videos for rankings, so I'm repeating the experience with the new set, and without further ado, let's get into it. So basically, if I had to compare this ranking compared to what my first impressions, and my first impressions are really early impressions, not very reliable. On this one, I have a lot more experience with the set. I have about 2 weeks of practice with the set, playing with some of the best players in Europe, so I have a pretty good understanding of the set and the power level of different cards. With that being said, we're still basically a week before the release of the set, before the pre-release of the set. So it is still very early impressions. So obviously take this into account as you are going to as you're going to go through it. And obviously I will try to review those predictions in a couple of months, like I did for Shadow of the Galaxy. Without further ado, let's start with the first aspect combinations, the Cunning Villainy. So for Cunning Villainy, we have one honorable mention. It is the Infiltrating Demolisher, which I think is a very good card. I think it turns out that the ability of, if you're playing like a Dooku deck, you can actually play this card on turn 1. You play just the event that allows you to put 2 token droids into play, and then you play Infiltrating Demolisher using Dooku. You can actually play this 4/5 saboteurs on turn 1, which is pretty powerful if your opponent doesn't have an answer for it. And what is cool about this card is like it's one of the very few exploit cards which is still completely fine if you play it for 4. Like a 4/5 for 4 saboteur is actually pretty decent, generally speaking. So I think this card is quite decent, and it should see play in separatist / exploit aggro Cunning Villainy deck. And in my opinion, it is actually one of the reasons to be playing those kind of deck in the first place. And the separatist trait is obviously very important in this archetype. Moving on the bronze medal, we have On the Doorstep. So On the Doorstep is pretty strong because it is a way to put a lot of tokens into play for a reasonable price, and all those tokens come into play ready, which allows them to attack right away with them, which is basically just kind of a 3/3 for 3 that can attack right after it's come to play. That's pretty decent, and obviously enables exploit and stuff like that. Also, the fact that it counts as an event means that if you play with Asajj, you can actually give +1 attack bonus to one of those tokens. So it's at the same time it's the enabler because it's an event, and it's also the payoff because you do put a unit in play, so you can buff that unit, so you can actually attack 4 damage right away whenever you play this in an Asajj deck. So it's a pretty strong card. It's one of the best token generator in the set, in my opinion. It's just a shame that it is in Cunning, because I think like the card would have been a lot better if it would have been in a color combination that is more powerful for token generation and for the export archetype in general. But I thought this is just a very solid card. Moving on, we got Cad Bane. I really thought this card was going to be absolutely amazing when I first saw it, and it turned out to not be as powerful as I initially thought. With that being said, it still remains a very powerful card with a very unique effect. His ability to effectively just completely clear the board, as well as putting a massive units on the battlefield, is very powerful. But it has a couple of inconveniences. First of all, as a top curve play, it's relatively situational. If you compare this to something like a Vader or a Maul, Vaders and Maul are just universally very powerful, and it's very rare to be in a situation where those cards are not good, especially Vader, which is so incredibly flexible. Cad Bane is very powerful when it's played in the right board state, in the right situation, but this situation does not always happen. Sometimes it's just simply nothing to get rid of, or just very small things. And it's sometimes where your opponent just has a removal for Cad Bane right away, in which case you don't really get any value. He's a much riskier unit to play compared to Vader, which is always going to provide you with some kind of value, even if it gets countered. while Cad Bane is very much a unit that is kind of like answer or die. If it gets answered, it's kind of a big negative play for you. However, when it does not get answered, it obviously wins you the game pretty quickly. So it is still a very, very strong card. It's just not as good as I thought it was. I still think it's going to see play, especially in Boba Cunning that doesn't have better alternative. The fact that it's Underworld and Bounty Hunter, so it's very easy to play with. Now there's 2 of them if you're planning to play that card. So it is situational, but it is incredibly powerful, and it is definitely going to be seeing a lot of competitive play. The number 1 for the Cunning villainy card is Elite P-38 Starfighter. This card is going to be basically in every kind of Cunning separatist deck, because it is a separatist unit, and it's just a very solid card, 3/2, immediate impact on the game, and does also something when it dies. Pinging damage is not something that to be taken lightly, allow you to finish off a unit, ping a shield off, and can be combined with Stark in Town in order to kill a unit, which is also very strong. There's also, of course, the obvious synergy with Jango Fett, which is worth noticing. So is it obviously a card that I think is going to be present in a lot of decks. I don't know if it's going to make the cut in the Boba decks, but for sure it's going to be a great card in Boba Red. I think Boba Red, this card is by far the biggest upgrade for Boba Red because it is another space unit, and obviously the ping ability synergizes extremely well with Stark in Town. So this card is going to be a strong force in the meta. We're going to see this card a lot in the next set. Then we got the card for Heroism Cunning. And first of all, in bronze, we got Plo Koon, which is a pretty strong card in my opinion. It comes down right about the time where your hero deploys, which means that in those conditions, triggering coordinate is not that difficult. And the fact that he gets to a 6/6 for 5 ambush is obviously excellent stats. And even at a 3/6 ambush, even if you don't, by any chance you don't have coordinate, the card still remains pretty good. Very importantly, it is a 4th Jedi Republic, which means that you can cheat it into play with, now there's 2 of them, also with You're My Only Hope. And the 4th Republic are also very strong traits that you can use to enable cards like 4th Throw. So this card has a lot of good things going for it, and I think it's going to see a decent amount of play. Moving on, we got Enfys Nest, which in my opinion is one of the strongest cards in the set, and it is a massive, massive upgrade, notably to Cunning Han, the Hold Han, because obviously it's another 7-drop, which Cunning Han has been hoping to find for a long time now, because one of the big reasons to play Cunning, to play Hold Han green instead of Hold Han yellow, is that Hold Han green was more consistent because it has better 7-drops, and it has a higher density of 7-drops. So yes, you got Fennec Shan, but Fennec Shan was not exactly amazing, to be fair, compared to the other options that notably green had. But now Cunning Han has access to Enfys Nest, which is a 7-drop, which is definitely on the same power level as the Han unit, and even better in some situations. I think this card is just simply incredible. It just does a lot for, it just does a lot of things. The fact that you can obviously bounce a unit when it comes into play, but also over and over again when it attacks is incredibly powerful. It's a 7 health, so it's hard to get rid of. You can play it early, 2 turns earlier thanks to Han's ability, so because it's 7-drop. It has Saboteur, which is also very relevant. But I think what really pushes this card on the edge is how powerful it is when it is combined with buff spells. Because well, obviously when you put a buff spell on, you increase her attack, which allows her to bounce units that are much bigger. So obviously, and the cool thing is like Han Yellow plays a lot of buffs natively, so it doesn't even have to cater to that card. It just literally already plays 3 copies of DF-44 blasters and 3 copies of Surprise Strike, which make this card incredibly powerful in my opinion. And it is really gives like a lot more late game to Han Yellow, which is really what was one of the weaknesses of the deck, was the lack of sometimes a lot of late game an ability to really keep your opponent on the toes, and works perfectly in the tempo plan that Han Yellow was trying to set up. So in my opinion, Han Yellow is going to be a strong force to reckon with in the new set because of Enfys. But obviously she's also good in any other yellow Heroism deck. Notably, of course, I think she's a bit too expensive for a Sabine deck, but maybe even you can play her with something like a sneak attack or something. But yeah, this card is just has a lot of good things going on. It is going to be a great card. Next, we got R2-D2, full of solutions. So this R2 is also great for many reasons. Obviously, stat line is very good. The 2-4 for 2 is very strong, but then you get on top of this, you get a very useful ability that allows you to dig in your deck for strong cards, and kind of and having this early on in the game to make sure that you're gonna have a strong turn to play is very nice. The only annoying thing is like you have to discard before you get to draw, which is a bit annoying. Sometimes there's just simply nothing you want to discard from your hand. But on and all, I think the R2-D2 is gonna be a near auto inclusion in any Cunning Heroism deck. The fact it does also Republic trait is very important, because then that means you can there's a lot of Republic units in this set, so you can follow that up with now there's 2 of them and put a 5-drop Republic on turn 2 fairly easily, and R2-D2 ability allow you to trigger that synergy more often, which is also very nice. So just a very solid card. Overall, I think that Cunning Heroism is the color combination that got the best cards in this set, which is very refreshing, because Cunning Heroism has been historically one of the weakest color combination in the game, in my opinion. So I'm really happy that this color combination is getting a lot of support in this set. Next, we got the Mono Cunning. So on Mono Cunning, there are 2 honorable mentions. There's the B1 security team, which is just a very solid Sentinel unit. Obviously, the playability of this card is going to depend on the meta, but I think it's the card that has good chances to see play. And then finally, Luke's Bonteri, which is, I think, a great potential turn 1 play for Boba. We know Boba has always been starving for a better turn 1 play. Notably Mono Boba. We saw Mono Boba, of course, still play sometime Viper Probe Droid. This card, in my opinion, is better than Viper Probe Droid, because there's simply a lot of deck that gets countered by the ability. Obviously, it's going to depend on the meta, but this ability is very strong against all the exploit decks. It's very strong against versus Han, like the young Han, because obviously it's all about discounting the price of those units. And I think this by itself is already making the card pretty good. And then obviously there's all the deck based on, now there's 2 of them with You're My Only Hope, and allow you to exhaust enemy unit or unexhaust one of your card, already one of your card. I think all this is pretty strong. So I like this card quite a bit, and I think the effect is overall more relevant than the see your opponent hand with Viper Probe Droid. But obviously it's going to depend on the meta. So in bronze, I have Breaking In. I was super excited about this card, and then I cooled down a little bit more on it. It is a strong option to have, and it is definitely going to be, depending on the meta, could be a card that we're going to see a lot of. But yeah, it's definitely not as strong as I initially thought it was, but I still think it's a great card. +2 all saboteurs with an immediate impact attack is just very solid, and we're going to see this card in a lot of sideboard. And it's going to be, the playability of this card is really going to come down to the meta, but I think it's a very strong card. Then there's obviously the Infamous. Now there are 2 of them, which is also is an interesting card. I think it's a little bit comparable to Triple Dark Raid, in the sense that it's a card that when you can pull it off, it's very strong, but it's not always super easy to pull off. I think it's even harder to use than Triple Dark Raid, but Triple Dark Raid can only be played in very specific decks, while this one can be played in a little bit more deck, but you still need to build around it significantly. So honestly, now there's 2 of them, is probably one of the hardest cards to evaluate in the meta, because there's simply just a lot of deck that can build around it to play it, but it's not entirely sure whether it is worth playing or not. It really comes down to, because it's a card that can be very powerful if you have the perfect combo for it, but then if you don't, the card is often a dead card. And the deck building constraint that you have to put on yourself in order to make this card consistent are significant. So I think it has good chance of seeing play. But I don't know how big of a force in meta. For me, it has been probably the most challenging card to evaluate in this set. So this is probably one I'm going to be very wrong about one way or another. In gold, I decided to put Shadowed Intentions. Once again, this is another card that is hard to evaluate. There's, it's a card that is either going to completely break the game or be just a sideboard card. But I think this perspective by itself is enough for me to justify giving it the gold medal for mono Cunning. It's not like this color has a lot of competition in this set anyway. I think this card can be, at the very least, is going to be a very powerful sideboard card depending on the meta, especially against control. The ability to turn any of your unit into a pseudo TIE Phantom can be incredibly impactful in some matchups. And this card can also spawn new decks. I also rank the card not only about their current power level, but also about the potential power level that they can have in the future of the game. And I think Shadowed Intentions by itself will enable new decks to appear. I already showed on my channel, for example, how powerful it could be in a Shirut deck. And it's only the beginning for this card. I think there's going to be a lot of powerful, very, very powerful combo with this card. So this is why I'm confident giving it the gold medal. Now let's get into villainy Vigilance. And first I wanted to put an honorable mention, Wartime Trade Official, which is going to be an important core cards for the exploit archetypes, because just having two bodies in one is just very, very useful for those decks. And in my opinion, one of the strong reasons to be playing blue in exploit. Another very strong reason to be playing blue in exploit is the malevolence here that I'm putting in bronze medal. This card is one of the best exploit payoff that we have access to. An amazing body can be played for as cheap as 1 resources, and even be played for free if you have Dooku, and has also an immediate impact on the game. And the Restore 2 is also extremely relevant, especially against aggros, since I think the exploit archetype is particularly weak to aggro, generally speaking. So I found the malevolence to be a strong reason to be playing blue in exploit, and it's a card that is extremely flexible. And even for 9, if you have to pay 9 for the malevolence, it's not completely crazy. Like, it's obviously it's not good for 9, but it's not completely terrible. So I think it's a pretty solid card for those archetypes. And number 2, I decided to put Rune Ako. Not as impressive as the Malevolence, but a card that I think is going to see a lot more wider play. Obviously, Malevolence is very restricted to the exploit archetype, while Rune Ako is more generally playable. First of all, it is a 3-2 for 2 in a color combination that doesn't have access to many 3-2 for 2. So that by itself is a pretty relevant. It is both Separatist and official, which is very relevant. And I think one of the biggest reasons why I rate this card highly is because I think this card is a big upgrade to Palpatine Blue. Because Palpatine Blue obviously has a reputation of being extremely weak against aggro, and Rune Ako does help a lot against aggro, because we're talking about a 2-drop that can trade with Battlefield Marine, and because it is an official, it can also allow you to give Sentinels to your Emperor Royal's Guard, which is your most important tool against aggro. So just gives you more officials and more officials that can trade with the enemy 2-drops. And obviously that's not even talking about the ability that sometimes will allow you to kill a unit. And all that good stuff. Another cool thing about Rune Ako is obviously is the fact that he's a Separatist, so you can play this in a Dooku deck for 0, so just a 3-2 that exploits something, then you get the -1/-1 right away, which is also something that might see a lot of play depending on the meta. So I think this card is very solid. My number 1, without much of a surprise, is General Grievous. I think just as I said, it's in constructed, it's basically just going to be a 4/4 for 3. But it is a 4/4 for 3, which we haven't seen a lot of them. So depending on the meta, this stat line could be extremely powerful. And it is both Separatist and official. Separatist is very relevant because you can play it on turn 1 with Grievous, and even if you can play it on turn 1 and using the trooper that gives you a +1/+1 experience when it dies, then you can play a 5/5 on turn 1, which I think is extremely powerful. And it is also official, which means that once again in a Palpatine deck, you're gonna have easier time turning on your Royal Guard, which makes General Grievous super impactful. So I really think that this card is going to see quite a bit of play. The fact that it can be pulled from Vader is also very relevant. So it's the card that is not particularly flashy, right? It's just a 4/4 for 3, but it just has so many little synergies with all the different decks that exist that I think it's going to see a lot of play. Moving on, we got Vigilance, Heroism, which was by far the hardest list to put together because this color combination is just incredibly weak in the set. It's actually crazy how little good cards this color combination got. Thankfully, it got saved by the leaders. I think Yoda is a very good leader, but outside of the leader, Jesus Christ, this combination got really screwed over. So we're gonna go over them, but to be fair, I really had struggles. So first of all, in bronze, I decided to put Satin Cries, which I've said in my previous video is gonna be a card that I don't think is gonna be relevant from set 3. I don't think it has the support, but I think as soon as she gets the support, she might be a deck of her own. I don't expect this anytime soon, but I think just for that reason alone, I wanted to give her the bronze medal. And it's not like she had a lot of competition anyway. In silver medal, they decided to put Outspoken Representative. This card is pretty good in order to keep, to basically have Coordinate. I don't think Coordinate is going to be a good archetype in Constructed, but if you're going to be running a card that does a 2-for-1, she's significantly better than some of the other kind of token enabler that we saw earlier, notably like the Wartime Trade Official, which is just a 1/3 that gives you a 1/1. This one is a 0/3 that gives you a 2/2, and it also gains Sentinel if you got Republic units. Obviously, the card is a lot worse if you don't play a lot of Republic units, so that's something. I think the fact that Republic is overall pretty weak is kind of a big thing that is holding this card down, but yeah, it's a pretty good card. It's just that unfortunately the archetypes that are being attached to this card are not really that strong in my opinion. Moving on, we got Hello There, which is my gold medal, and I've actually talked down on this card, said this card was not very good, and I still believe that. So I still don't think this card is particularly strong. But as I said, the Vigilance Heroism is so empty in terms of options that it was a little bit hard for me to rank them. And Hello There is definitely the Vigilance Heroism card, which I think has the most potential to see play because of how widely it can see play potentially. With all that being said, I'm not super confident that it's going to see a lot of play. So I'm sorry, this category was just very, very difficult for me to find 3 good cards in that category, which is a bit of a shame. Then we got Mono Vigilance. So in Mono Vigilance, I put in bronze medal the Invasion of Christophis, which is obviously our sweeper. I think this card is a very good card in the exploit archetypes because this allows you to, of course, like a one-sided sweeper that you can play as early as 7 is pretty relevant. Obviously, you need to have a lot of unit token, but as far as the exploit card is concerned, I think it's one of the best. I don't know how much is going to see play because it's very obviously only for exploit archetypes. But I think it's going to see a bit of play and at least in the sideboard. So that's why bronze medal. Silver medal, we got Ki-Adi-Mundi. I think this card is going to be relevant because of its stats. In Vigilance color combo, we simply do not have that many units which have like insane stat like this. So I think it really feels a particular need for Vigilance cards, which I think is quite neat. Obviously, it has extremely good trait with Force, Jedi, Republic. Can be played from now there's 2 of them. Can be cheated in play from You're My Only Hope. And the coordinate is not super relevant, but it's not completely irrelevant. So I think this card has a lot of things going for it. And I think it's going to see a little bit of play. Finally, in gold medal, I decided to choose Royal Guard Attaché, which might be a surprise to some of you guys, but I think this card is very good in Krennic. And I think Krennic is a deck that has always been competitive, even in set 2. And I think this card will definitely be a huge boost to the archetypes because helping the early game of a control deck is always something that is very powerful. Because obviously, a Cunning is the kind of deck that has a tendency sometimes to have a problem clearing the board early on, especially since it has a leader that doesn't have really this ability to defeat enemy units because of such a low attack. So the really the biggest weakness of Krennic was its inability to kind of clear the board early on. And a 3-3 for 2, so effectively a battlefield marine for Krennic, is exactly what it needed in order to stabilize early on the game, in order to transition into this late game and do all the crazy Krennic stuff that we know. So I think this card is a pretty big upgrade for the archetypes, and that's why, and it's, as I said, it's a big upgrade to an archetype which I think is already very strong. So that's why I put it in gold medal. Next we're going into Villainy Command. Villainy Command in bronze, I decided to put Kalani. Kalani is a card that is not super impressive on paper, but once you think about it as a card that you pay 4 resources for instead of 6, because of Dooku's ability, then it becomes a lot more attractive. So obviously this card is only truly good in Dooku, but in Dooku it is very impressive because a 5/7 for 4 is just a lot of stats. The ability to give +2/+2 to another unit when it attacks is very relevant in a separatist deck. You pretty much very rarely use the 2 units +2/+2. Usually you're only going to give it to only 1. But yeah, just a 5/7 that can buff your unit is just it's just very solid. And the fact that once again you can play this as early at turn 3 is just pretty mental. So in my opinion, as I said earlier in my videos, is like I think Dooku is not very good with exploit card. He's better with separatists who don't have exploits but then become extremely pushed when they do gain exploit thanks to Dooku. So a good example for this is Kalani. Another good example is the Count Dooku unit, which is also a separatist. In silver, we got Kraken, which is another card for the exploit archetype, which benefits a lot from getting discounted by Dooku. So you can play this card as early as turn 2. You sacrifice a battle token to put this card in play, but you gain 2 thanks to the when play ability, as well as a 2/5 body. And the ability, once again, very relevant to give all of your token unit +1/+1 for this phase. I think it's pretty relevant. So this card is an absolute auto-include, in my opinion, in any Dooku deck because of how much it allows you to populate your board and can be played either on turn 2 or on turn 4, depending on what you prefer. And then finally, we got Confederate Courier in number 1. I think this card is the most important enablers for the exploit archetype, the ability to play this on turn 1 and then can be exploited on turn 2 to play, for example, a Kraken is very strong and leaving a unit behind. So I think it's just the most important card of the exploit. So as you can see, I don't think Command Villainy got a lot of new stuff in this set, which I think is good because I believe Cunning Villainy is already strong enough as it is. However, it got a lot of cards for the exploit archetypes, and that's really cool because it's going to enable a new playstyle. And I don't think any of those cards are really playable outside of the exploit archetype, which I think is a good thing in my opinion. Then we got Command Heroism, which even though, as I said, the coordinate archetype not really got a whole lot going on, there's a couple of good cards in this color combination that we're going to see right away. The first one is Captain Rex. I think this card, if you really want to play a token-based coordinate deck, I think Captain Rex is by far the best enabler for that, just to give you a 4/4 and 2 clone troopers. That's just a lot of stats for 6 drops, so I think this card is decent in that context. Nothing crazy, but I think it's decent. Number 2, we got Republic Tactician Officer, which is basically kind of like a Snowtrooper Lieutenant, but as a 1/4 instead of a 2/2. And we know that Snowtrooper Lieutenant is quite a decent card, to say the least. The only thing that hurts this card is the fact that just Republic in general is just not very strong. There's just not that many good early game Republic units. So I think Republic Tactical Officer might be just a good card that happens to not fit very well with the rest of the set because they just decided to make Republic very weak for some reason. But obviously, if you're going to be playing a coordinate archetypes with the Republic cards, Republic Tactical Officer is going to be an important card, be able to kind of get better trades or put pressure on your opponent base, and adding more to your board is exactly what this kind of deck wants to do. Last but not least, we got Admiral Yularen, which I think is a card which, as opposed to the 2 previous ones, is playable in decks that are not based on Republic, and I think this is ultimately what gonna make Admiral Yularen the best card of them. What I love about it is like it's a 2/4/5 restore 1 is actually pretty decent stat for 3, and the ability is very relevant. +1 health to all Heroism units. We know that Heroism units are usually the strongest units in those kind of decks anyways, so being able to give +1 health to those units is very relevant. It is also official. It is a Republic. Obviously it would be better as a Rebel, but you know, it is what it is. I think the card is just very solid. I think it's particularly good in hand green when you can play this card as early as turn 1 using, of course, hand's ability. You get a 2/3 restore 1 and give +1 to all the Heroism units. I think the card is just very solid. Finally, so overall a pretty weak set for Heroism command for the second time in a row, because set 2 was also very weak for Heroism command in my opinion. So it's a bit unfortunate for this color combination. Moving on, we got, of course, our mono command cards. First, an honorable mention, I decided to put Gore. I don't think this card is an auto-include in the exploit archetypes. I think it's a bit expensive, but it is definitely doing something very unique, and there's no other card in the game that can fulfill that role as an exploit payoff with an immediate impact that can really turn a game on its head. So we'll see exactly how much this card ends up seeing play, but in my opinion, it deserves an honorable mention. Moving on into the bronze medal, I decided to put the Clone Wars. So the Clone Wars has a lot of interesting implications. First of all, it is one of the only way to generate tokens if you are playing to generate like Clone Troopers token if you're playing Villainy with Nalase, which I think is pretty relevant. There's a lot of strong combinations with the Clone Wars when you can play the Clone Wars, and then you can play like the card that can bounce all the tokens, or you can just play the Clone Wars and then you play Snoke and you kill the opponent tokens and stuff. Obviously, it's a very late game card. The more resource that you use on this card, the more value you're getting out of it, and there's some interesting combination to do with it. So I think it's going to be a pretty interesting card to build around, and I think it can be very powerful in the right deck if you build around it. Next, we got B2 Legionary as a silver medal. Might be surprising to see such a basic card in such a high ranking. And the reason for it is because, once again, 5/4/5 Sentinels Overwhelm, not so impressive by itself, but once you play this in the context of a Dooku deck, suddenly the card becomes pretty busted. You can play this as early as turn 2, 5/4 Sentinels, Overwhelm is just very powerful. One thing that is, I think, really good with this card is that it does compensate for one of the major weaknesses of Dooku, which is that it's relatively weak to aggro, because it's a deck that just takes a lot of time to set up and all that stuff. So being able to have this big Sentinel unit that you can play as early as turn 2, that can trade against Cassian, can trade against Sabine, can trade against all those 5 health units, I think is very, very relevant. And obviously be able to attack and overwhelm is also a nice little bonus. So I think it's just a very solid card. Obviously, it's only going to be played in one particular deck. Then we got Hyung, which in my opinion is one of the strongest cards in the set. This card is just incredible. It has an immediate impact on the game. The +2/+2, there's tons of units that really benefit immensely from +2/+2. I don't know if you remember, I put Gamera and Retainer as the #1 best mono command card in set 1. And I don't think it deserved that ranking back then, and I revised my ranking afterwards. But I think this card, Gamera and Retainer, might re-become one of the best mono command card in set on set 1 in the context of in set 2 in the combination of set 3, because Gamera and Retainer combines extremely well with Hyung, as you give the Retainers, not only you give it Sentinel, but also give it +2/+2, making 5/4 Sentinels just very, very powerful. So Hyung is just kind of this wing leader that can be used in any deck, which is incredible. Obviously, wing leader is better because you get those experience tokens permanently, but the fact that it's only limited to Rebel is starting to become a very, very major restriction, as more and more cards are getting printed that don't have the Rebel trait. So Hyung is a lot less restrictive, and is a real pain to deal with. So this card is just incredible, and in my opinion, it is by far the best command card of the set. Moving on, we got Aggression Villainy, and in Aggression Villainy, in bronze, I've decided to put OOM series officers. I like this card because it puts a threat on the board, and it gives you guaranteed damage, a little bit like a Jyn Erso, but like a much cheaper one. So I think it's gonna be, I think it's a card that's gonna see play in almost every aggressive aggression villainy archetypes, especially the one that have some synergy with the Separatist, and there's some good aggro synergies with Separatists, which we're gonna see later on. Moving on, we got the Confederate Tri-Fighter, which is just simply just a 3/3 for 3 that prevents your opponent from healing the base. I think this kind of card is very strong because obviously the fact the space unit means that it's more likely to stick on the battlefield. 3 health for a space unit is actually pretty decent. So it is definitely a spaceship which I think is going to be very strong in those aggressive archetypes. If not in the main deck, at least in the sideboard. It's also it's definitely an upgrade over Wolf in those kind of all space archetypes. So it's really a solid card. Moving on, in gold medal, I decided to put the Count Dooku. Count Dooku is just really a beast, 6/6 overwhelm with an immediate impact on the game. In my opinion, is one of the, I think it's playable outside of exploit archetypes. Obviously, it's better in an exploit archetype, but I think it's playable outside because the size of the unit that you're actually killing with it actually matters. I don't know if we're going to see a deck that wants to play this card, but the card is undeniably very powerful in a vacuum. Moving on, we got obviously our traditional aggression heroism, a very strong color combinations historically, but in this set it's not getting as much as usual. But it's still getting some really strong card. In fact, we even have 2 honorable mentions here with the Senatorial Corvette, which I think is a very solid space unit that does a 2-for-1 trade. And we got Stila Guerrera, which depending on the meta, might just be an extremely powerful engine if you play enough tactic in your deck. I think this card just gives you a lot of card advantage, which is very impressive. In bronze medal, I decided to put Anakin Skywalker. The reason for this is because, so at the beginning, I was not a very big fan of this card because I simply thought that that Podamon was just a much better card. And it is, Podamon is a much better card, but Anakin Skywalker has some advantages. First of all, the fact that the big advantage that Anakin Skywalker is having is that it is a Force Jedi Republic. That means you can cheat this card into play on turn 2 using, now there's 2 of them. Which is just very, very strong. Because you can play this card as early as turn 2. Podamon, obviously, there's no resistance to drop in the game right now. So now there's 2 of them cannot really be used to cheat Podamon in play as we speak. So that reason alone is enough to put Anakin Skywalker, have a presence in the meta and deserving of this bronze medal, even though we all agree it is not as good as Podamon. In silver, we got Jyn Erso, not a particularly flashy card, but I think a card that is going to find a home in Sabine, and just being a card that's going to see play in Sabine, I think by itself qualifies it for being a silver medal. It's just another rebel. 3/2 stat line is just very solid, especially in an aggro deck, and the ability is quite relevant because we know that Sabine Green is capable of defeating enemy units quite easily with Energy Conversion Lab, and this card can really slap for a lot of damage. In number 1, we got Jesse, which I think is a card that is going to be very, very powerful every time you play against a deck that doesn't really care about the battle droid, which I think is the majority of them. What is so powerful with Jesse is obviously this 5/4 stat line, which allows him to put a tremendous amount of pressure on the enemy base, as well as killing very large units. All those 3/5 that you see in the game, that there's quite a few of them. Obviously, Tech, DJ, Toro, Boba, obviously a Sabine unit, Cassian, so many 3/5s in this meta, and Jesse be able to kill those guys and not die in the process, just incredible. I mean, obviously the battle droid will probably finish it off afterwards, but it still requires an action for the opponent. I just think that Jesse is just is just so strong. But in my opinion, I don't think Jesse is good in a mid-range or control deck, because then obviously you're not really trading for you. It will kill something, but probably will die in the process. However, in a pure aggro deck, like a Sabine deck, Jesse is going to be incredible, because you get this 5/4 and then you can slap with it at least once, just a tremendous amount of damage on the opponent. So I think this card is going to be very strong in Sabine. Let's talk now about Mono Aggression. Mono Aggression, we got the bronze medal, we got Mr. Bones. Not a particular flashy card, it's a 3/1 for 1, but it's a card I think the double aggression deck will appreciate, even if the ability is extremely situational. In silver, we got Twice to Pride, which I think is a card that can really take a lot of people by surprise. Just the ability to give +4 attack a little bit out of nowhere for only 2 is very powerful. You can also use this on opponent units to kill them, but most of the time, of course, this is going to be used on your own unit, and when your opponent is tap out, in order to deal tremendous amount of damage out of nowhere. I think the double aggression might be this might be the card that the double aggression needed to really be put on the edge as to being a super aggressive archetype that can really kill you out of nowhere. Finally, gold medal, I decided to choose a Vanguard Droid Bomber. I think this card is just very strong in an aggro archetype. Just ability to put a 2/2 in space and having an immediate impact, dealing some damage to the base is just very powerful. Having another Separatist unit is not that difficult. There's quite a few Separatist units that we saw earlier, notably, that I think are quite strong in, and if you are playing, of course, an Asajj aggro deck, which obviously Asajj is a leader that is Separatist herself, that makes it very easy to trigger. So I found this card quite strong, and that's why I give it the gold medal. And I think it's going to see, I mean, the other cards are arguably maybe better, but the fact that they are double aggression really is going to limit how much you're going to see play. While I think the Vanguard Droid Bomber can be played in a wide amount of different decks, as long as you're playing a few Separatist units. Finally, Mono Villainy. So Mono aspect cards, especially in Villainy and Heroism, are notorious for being quite weak, but Mono Villainy, once again, is getting some very solid card here. And in bronze medal, we got Droid Deployment, which is an amazing enablers for those exploits. Basically, you're playing this in an exploit deck. It's almost like you're gaining resources because you're spending 2 resources to put 2 battle droid, and both of the battle droids are going to be essentially traded for 4 resources each. Notably, of course, in a Dooku deck, which in my opinion is the best exploit archetypes anyway. So Droid Deployment is a very solid card in that, obviously. Then we got Merciless Contest. So Merciless Contest is obviously the new power of the dark side. Obviously not as good as Power of the Dark Side, as you have to defeat your own units and also cannot defeat leaders, which is a very big deal. But sometimes not defeating leaders can be an upside. We know this with Avengers sometimes. You got a very large, relatively small leaders and then a very large unit in it. Then your opponent has to defeat the large unit. That can be an advantage as well. The fact that you have to defeat your own unit using Merciless Contest is not that big of a deal in a control deck that usually often does not play any units. So I think this card is very strong. It's basically extra copies of a Power Dark Side, and in my opinion, the strongest upgrade that hard control decks have obtained from this set. One downside though is like the fact that it's not Vigilance is actually a downside, because in those hard control decks, because obviously it makes it Charleston really need to have like a lot of blue cards to work, and hard control decks still want to play Charleston. Another cool thing about this card is like it does make the perspective of a non-blue control deck a lot more feasible, because now other colors have access to those hard removal. So this card might be single-handedly responsible for new control archetypes that don't necessarily play blue. I still don't think that's enough, but it is definitely a first step toward those non-blue control decks that we might see in the future. Number 1, we have the Invisible Hand, which in my opinion is one of the strongest cards to play in a Dooku list. Once again, the fact that you can play it 2 turns earlier for 6, thanks to the exploitability of Dooku, is so incredibly relevant. And obviously discarding a battle token when you know you're going to get 4 additional battle tokens with a 1 playability is very powerful. The Invisible Hand is a strong card because it's a card 7 health in space, relatively difficult to get off the board. If you don't have an answer for it, it will slap you for 1 million damage next turn and possibly one-shot you. And if you do kill it, it still leaves a bunch of droid battle token behind, so just a very solid card. Finally, in Heroism, unfortunately, Heroism got screwed very hard compared to Villainy. So we're going into, first of all, the bronze medal, the Tranquility. It was very hard to find a decent card in this slot. I took Tranquility because it's card advantage, it's a big space unit, and it has a on-attack ability that is not completely terrible. I don't think this is going to see any competitive play, but it is not a horrible card. Then in silver, I decided to put Ahsoka Padawan lightsaber. If Ahsoka sees play, which I don't think it will, the card is kind of decent in this deck. Once again, not particularly impressive, but it is definitely in the realm of playable, maybe. And in number 1, we have a card that is not super impressive, but it's gonna see a little bit of play. And the reason is because Palpatine, the new Chancellor Palpatine leader, is a leader that basically can flip around, needs basically an heroism unit to die in order to flip to the dark side. And obviously the best way to do this is to have a unit that is capable of trading with the enemy units. And obviously Phase 1 Clone Troopers allows you to trade with all the 1-drops in the game, I mean most of them, notably the Battlefield Marines and all that, and allows you to get yourself on the flip on the Chancellor on the other side. And believe it or not, there's just not that many 3-2-for-2 in Heroism. There's the Lothal Insurgent, which you're already playing, but you might need to have more of 3, so if you need more copies of Lothal Insurgent, then you need to play the Phase 1 Clan Troopers. And in that context, this card's going to see play. It's extremely niche, but it's going to see some competitive play in the Chancellor Palpatine for sure. Finally, we get into the new, the true neutral cards. Once again, it was hard to find 3 good cards in that category. I decided to put Hold Out Blaster, just because I think the card is kind of decent. I think it was one of my viewers who actually pointed out to me that Hold Out Blaster is actually not bad in Jango Fett. And Jango Fett might see some play, especially if Boba gets bound. So, is it guaranteed going to see play in there? I don't know. It's also, it might see play in Gar Saxon, maybe. So, it's not a completely unplayable card. That's why it's a bronze medal. Okay, much better. We got a Private Manufacturing, which might see play as a sideboard card, or maybe in the main deck in some of those tokens decks, notably the Exploit. I think it's better in Exploit, probably. 2 cards, draw 2 is just very solid. And in number 1, a card that I think, I don't know if it's going to see play, but it's definitely an interesting card, and it does an effect that no other card in the game does, and that's obviously Brain Invaders. That is very powerful against any leaders that is really heavily reliant on his leader's ability. I think the best the leaders that are the most reliant on their leader's ability, I think probably Hold Han, New Han, and Dooku, I think, are the 3 biggest examples that comes to mind. Any leader that has ability to reduce the price of their units is going to be hating to play against this card. So depending on the meta, I could see Brain Invader becoming a sideboard card. Even though obviously the stats are pretty horrible for the price, but if you're playing against a deck that doesn't have that many removal and is going to be suffering a lot from that card, then this could be a very strong unit. Finally, the bases. So the bases, there's only 4 bases in this set. So obviously I only had to exclude one, but I still needed to decide which one is better than the other. So we get in first with the bronze medal with Petranaki Arena. I don't think this base is going to see any play. I don't think the +1 attack on your leader is worthy of taking 4 damage right from the beginning of the game. So I don't think this card is going to see any play. But, I mean, I guess in a super aggressive Cunning deck where you really don't care about your HP and you just want to get a little bit of humph, maybe people are going to try to play this in a Kylo Ren and see if getting +1 attack on a Kylo Ren is worthy of losing 4 HP. I don't think it does, simply because of the mirror match. I mean, okay, maybe the context in which I can see this card being played is like you are playing a super aggressive deck with the Cunning base, and you do not care about, and you don't play, and the meta has no aggro. So you don't care at all about racing ever. I think the scenario is extremely unlikely, but there is a world in which this card can see a little bit of play. Next we got Pole City. I think the +1 health on the leaders is a bit more relevant. I think the biggest example on how this card can be potentially relevant in the meta is its combination with Chirrut. The fact that Chirrut really benefits a lot from the extra health, especially because it allows him to dodge a takedown. Is that enough for this card to see play? I highly doubt it, but it's still, in my opinion, the second base deck of the base of the set. And finally, first and best base of the set, in my opinion, is Droid Manufactory. I think getting 2 battle droids for free can be very relevant in an aggro exploit deck. So obviously you need to be playing an aggro exploit deck to make use of that. But if you do, then the card is quite decent. Is that going to see a lot of play? No, it's going to be extremely niche, and I don't even think the deck that plays that is going to be particularly strong, but it is definitely the best of the bases in the set. Obviously, the base that did not get mentioned in that top 3 is the base that draws you a card, which I think until we see those incredibly all-in combo decks that needs to draw an extra card somewhere, this base is never going to see play until we get to that point, if we ever get to that point in the game. We are continuing now with the leaders. Obviously the leaders, the moment, I haven't done my leader tier list yet, but I've done my top 3 favorite leaders of the set, and obviously before the top 3 we got a couple of honorable mention. Honorable mention, I decided to put Count Dooku and Asajj Ventress. I've talked a lot about Count Dooku in this video. Count Dooku just makes a lot of units that otherwise would not be very good, and he turns them into really strong cards. And obviously there's a lot of support for the exploit archetypes, and obviously Count Dooku is, in my opinion, the best way to use exploit. I think his leader's ability is one of the strongest in the game. Even though it is limited to the Separatist card, I think there's enough Separatist support to make Count Dooku competitive. However, one thing that I really don't like about Count Dooku is how late he deploys. I think the playstyle of this deck is really to try to take some huge tempo swing with those amazing exploit, kind of super fast exploit shenanigans, and the fact that he deploys so incredibly late is such a massive deal. I think this leader would be so much better if he was deploying on 6 or on 5, even if it meant weaker stats, because obviously whenever you are trying to play like those super strong units 1 turn earlier, you want to take advantage of that momentum by adding a deploy leader that can put additional pressure. So the fact that you're getting those tempo boost with that incredibly strong leader's ability, but you're not able to capitalize on it because you don't have a leader deploy, is kind of a big bummer. And whenever Count Dooku deploys, it's often just way too late into the game. So that's really a big problem. The second problem with how slow Count Dooku deploys is obviously against aggro. I think exploit as an archetype is naturally relatively weak to aggro, because you're playing, of course, you're trying to set up those droids and then you're trying to exploit them to play bigger units. And obviously if your opponent, you cannot, it's a deck that sometimes can play turn where it does nothing during a turn. All it does is just put a bunch of droids in play. And whenever you're playing against aggro, you cannot afford to take those turns off. So naturally, there's a couple of things you can do to fight this, as there's a couple of good like Sentinel units in the set that can help you with that. But that's a natural weakness, I would say. And the fact that it is also deployed late really makes the aggro matchup even more difficult. I think Count Dooku would be probably the best leader in the set if it only could deploy earlier. Then we got Asajj Ventress. Asajj Ventress is another leader I think is quite strong. I think our big Achilles heels is their 4 health. 4 health is just incredibly not enough for a leader. It's just so incredibly easy to kill for the opponent. And that is our biggest problem. She has a strong leader ability, and she she has a strong deploy, and the fact that she deployed early is very relevant. But I think her health is too much. I think she's gonna see some competitive play, just like Dooku, but I don't think she's gonna be a main drive in the set. Also, she obviously might see a lot more play when Boba gets banned, because obviously right now Boba is just such an insanely oppressive card in that realm of cunning villainy. And I think Asajj Ventress will become more relevant if Boba gets banned. But even if Boba doesn't get banned, I think she's still going to see some competitive play. That's why I put her in honorable mention. My number 3 is Anakin Skywalker. Anakin Skywalker, I think, is a very strong leader. His leader's ability allows him to take very, very good, efficient trades. And early on in the game, yes, you have to spend health in order to get the +2 attack bonus, but often being able to use a unit and trade with a much bigger unit can save you way more than 2 HP that you spend to use Anakin's ability in the first place. So I think that's very, very strong. And the hero deploy is also very impressive. In my opinion, Anakin Skywalker is one of the best leaders that deploys on 6 because of how insane amount of stat that he has. Basically, at this point of the game, when you deploy Anakin Skywalker, very often Anakin is going to be at least something along the line of the 5-7 or at least or 6-7. Most of the time, it's 6-7 or 7-7. Whether it is 6-7 or 7-7, it doesn't matter. It's an insane amount of stats for what you're getting. And it is also overwhelmed, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger as time goes by. It just has this incredible ability to raise the opponent. And it is also Force Jedi Republic, which has 3 relevant traits in this game. Also, it is in aggression, heroism, which is, as we know, one of the strongest heroism color combination in the game. So yeah, Anakin Skywalker just has a lot of things going for him. So why do I only put him in 3rd place? I put him in 3rd place for 2 reasons. The first reason is, one of the weaknesses of Anakin is that he doesn't have a strong game plan identity. He's not really an aggro leader because his ability is mostly about trading, because it's only the +2 attack bonus only works if you're attacking other units, so it's more of a control ability. And then he deploys relatively late, so he's obviously not an aggro leader, but he's not really a control leader either because you do not want to take damage whenever you are a control leader, and obviously Anakin is here to kind of close out the game with a massive body with overwhelm. So he's obviously kind of a mid-range leader. So I think this lack of strong identity is a disadvantage. The second disadvantage of Anakin Skywalker is obviously the competition in that category. There's simply just, he has to compete with some of the best leaders in the game. He has to compete notably with Sabine Wren and Han, the young Han from set 2. And those are some of the best leaders in the game. So the competition for Anakin is going to be super fierce. But I think there's going to be a few decks that are going to be preferring to play Anakin over those 2 other alternatives. And I think that's why I'm putting in bronze medal. It's definitely going to see some competitive play. In silver, I decided to choose Chancellor Palpatine. So I said in my previous video that I found Chancellor Palpatine to be extremely clunky. That my first impression was I think Chancellor Palpatine is going to be super clunky. After playing with him, and after playing with him quite a bit, in the context of a control deck, I found Chancellor Palpatine to not be as clunky as I initially thought. But it is still a leader that is quite high variance, in a sense that there's going to be games where everything goes fine, where everything flows perfectly, and he's going to flip around like crazy and give you crazy value, and it's going to feel very strong. And there's going to be some games where you're going to be playing against him, while Palpatine is going to be playing against you. And when you never get the right card at the right moment, and it's just this additional added variance is just going to be a big harm to competitive play. So I don't exactly know how much is obviously by far the hardest leaders to evaluate in the set. Is by far the hardest leader to evaluate. And I might change my ranking about him whenever I do my tier list. I don't even know where I'm going to be standing on him in a few days. Maybe there's going to be an insane build that's going to be found about him. It's still very difficult to know where we stand. But obviously, Chancellor Palpatine, in my opinion, is a lot better than what I initially thought. The amount of value that he gives is significant. He's not that difficult to flip around. And he also, of course, giving you access, being able to play the best card of a given color in both heroism and villainy is a massive, massive upside. Obviously, being able to play, Luke Skywalker and Avenger in the same deck is completely absurd. And that's just a very strong thing to do. Something to understand also with Palpatine is So I play mostly Palpatine as a control leader. I think he's mostly a control leader because he does not deploy, and most of his benefits are more like control. He heals you, draw a card, put some units on board. Those are more like kind of control mechanics. There's a thing of dealing damage to your opponent, but it's a very neglectable compared to the other bonuses. Overall, he's more of a control leader, undeniably, in my opinion. I mean, I think there's going to be two ways to play Palpatine. I think it's going to be the control version that plays blue, and there's going to be kind of the value mid-range version that plays green. I could be wrong about this. One of the things is I wish Palpatine was a different color. The fact that Cunning is really the worst color for Chancellor Palpatine, in my opinion, is really the color where he benefits the least amount, because he's definitely not a temple leader. So I think it would have been so much better if Palpatine was either blue or green in terms of how playable it would be, because then you could be able to play double aspect card. Because double aspect Chancellor Palpatine doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, I think he's a strong leader. We're still figuring it out. He's definitely going to be enforced in the meta. That's why I put it a silver medal. He's definitely going to be played. But he's a high variance leader. He's a leader that sometimes is going to work great and he's going to be very, very strong, and sometimes it's not going to work. But obviously there's a lot of room for improvement for this leader. There's a lot of ways this leader could become stronger. There's also a lot of ways for this leader to get worse, because people are also going to learn how to play against it. And there's ways the opponent can play that can really screw you over. One of the classic play, for example, to screw up Palpatine is obviously to kill whenever he's flipping to the dark side. You can actually kill his heroism unit, and then he's left without no heroism unit into play, which is going to make it very hard to flip it on the other side whenever he's going to be back into heroism side. Anyway, that kind of little things. In any case, we're still figuring that out. For instance, I'm giving it a silver medal, but I can tell this ranking might change. Number 1, I decided to put Yoda. Okay, so I don't think Yoda is an amazing leader. I don't think he's on the same level as some of the best leaders of other sets. I don't think he's on the same level as Young Han. I don't think he's on the same level of any of the top tier leaders that we have in Spark of Rebellion. But in my opinion, he's the strongest leader in the set. At least it's the leader that I'm the most confident that he's going to see play in the metagame. And the reason for it is because he has one of the strongest leader deploy on 7 in the entire game. We're talking about a unit that comes to play, kills something, provide an insanely big body of 4/9, and has Restore 2, which is also an incredible ability. He's one of the strongest hero flip in the game with basically you go Luke Skywalker, kill something, use Yoda's ability to make sure you can put a strong card, the exact card you want on top of the deck. Then you deploy Yoda, you discard that card, and you kill another unit. And so you've killed 2 units, and you leave behind a 4/9 Restore 2 and a 6/7 Restore 3. That's insane. That is insane. So, and there's also so that's very powerful. But there's a lot of other cool stuff going on with Yoda. His leader's ability is quite easy to use. There's tons of great synergy with it, notably You're My Only Hope. You're My Only Hope in combination with Yoda is so much better than now there's 2 of them. It's so much easier to use because first of all, you don't have to 2-1 yourself. All you have to do is have this card in your hand, put it back on top, play You're My Only Hope, and that's it. You don't even have a special unit in play. It doesn't have to share trait or whatever. Like, it's so much easier to use than now there's 2 of them. So much easier. And it does pretty much the same thing, which is putting a 5-drop on turn 2, or play a Luke earlier. And not only that, You're My Only Hope is also a great way to compensate for one of the weakness of the leader. And the weakness of the leader is that it does deploy very late. So it's quite of a very slow leader. But You're My Only Hope really allows you to gain those tempo advantage that really gives you a benefit. There's of course the synergy with Foresight that allows you to draw a card every turn, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on with this leader. In my opinion, the best version, and I've already shown it on my channel, is the red version, because it's basically just a classic red, white, blue version, but like kind of the big question and the only caveat with this leader, even though it has a lot of great thing going for it, is it going to be better than Rey? Is it going to be better than the Young Han Blue? And On this, I don't have the answer to that question. It's gonna be part of testing to know which of the three leaders are gonna be better for blue-white archetype, for blue-white, specifically for blue-white-red. There might also be other combination with Yoda. That might be maybe some. A lot of people are telling me a lot of good thing about the blue-white-yellow. So I also need to test that, see how it goes. So there's a lot of cool thing going on with this leader, and I really truly hope that he's gonna be an important force of the meta. And I think he's gonna be meta. That's guaranteed. I would be shocked if Yoda doesn't see a lot of competitive play. Another question is either gonna be tier 2, or is it gonna be tier 1. Time will tell. In my opinion, he's the best leader of the set. Even though, as I said, maybe there's some untapped potential with Palpatine that we haven't discovered yet, but so far as I've seen, he's the strongest leader in the set. Now let's talk about the non-leaders for my overall ranking of the top 3 best card in the set. In number 3, Enfys. I know she was only a silver medal, but in my opinion, she's the third strongest card in the set. I already explained why. I think she's an insane upgrade to a very powerful deck, which is obviously Old Han Yellow, which is an already very powerful archetype, and she's a very strong upgrade to that deck. So for that reason alone, deserved a bronze medal. But obviously, she might be seen in other decks. She's just one of the best top ender in the set. Number 2, of course, if I put Enfys in silver medal and R2D2 in gold medal, then obviously R2D2 is going to be appearing higher in the ranking than Enfys in this overall ranking, and R2D2 is probably one of the most universally playable card in the set. It's just going to be an auto-include in all Cunning Heroism, and Cunning Heroism is so much better thanks to R2 and Enfys, and the fact that those two are together is also kind of helping out their ranking. They're kind of both helping each other at getting up in the ranking because of all the decks that are going to be including those two cards. So I think it's a very, very strong card. It's going to see, the reason why I rate it over Enfys is because it's going to see more play than Enfys, even though Enfys might have a bigger of an impact in the deck what she plays. And in number 1, we have Young. I decided so Young is, in my opinion, the strongest card of Twilight of the Republic. For multiple reasons. First of all, it is the most universally playable card of this set. It's a card that you can play in a wide variety of deck. It's going to be a staple in most of the greens archetype. I think most of the green decks are going to be playing Young. Maybe not all of them, but the vast majority of the green archetypes are going to see play. So she's going to be the most widely playable card in the set. Because it's so incredibly flexible, it's so impactful, and obviously it's mono green, so it's just very powerful. So it's just a very, very solid card. It's gonna see play obviously in those Young Han green decks. It's gonna see play in all those kind of like mid-range control Krennic or like Kira deck that are gonna be wanting to boost their early game. It's going to see play in those Palpatine deck that are putting those kind of gamer entertainers, blocking them to try to help out against aggro. It's going to see play, it might even see play in Boba, even though Boba most of the time prefers to go for ramp on turn 2. If you don't find a ramp, Young could be a very good play instead. So there's just so much cool thing. It's very strong in Ewing reinforcement. There's just a lot of things going on with this card, and I think it's going to see the card. It's going to be by far the most played card of the set, in my opinion, in competitive. Anyway, that's it for this very long video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Overall, I think this set is significantly weaker than the set 2 in terms of like the power level of the cards. However, I had a lot of fun building new decks with this set, and paradoxically, even though those new archetypes might not be as strong as, the individual cards might not be as strong as the card from set 2, the archetypes, however, might be more powerful, and actually this set might bring more new archetypes to the table than what set 2 did. So all this remains to be seen. In any case, I hope the best for the set. I hope it's going to bring a nice refreshment to the meta, and I hope it's going to do it. I don't exactly know if it's gonna do it or not yet, but I really hope it will. And obviously, if Boba gets banned, that's gonna help a lot of those leaders breathe out. I think something we haven't talked about in this video, but Jango Fett, in my opinion, if Boba gets banned, I think you can make a strong argument to put Jango is one of the top 3 best leader in the set. Right now, the only reason why there's no reason to play Jango is because Boba is just strictly better. It's not strictly better, but it's very close to be strictly better. But if Boba gets banned, I think Jango automatically becomes one of the best leaders in this set. So this is also something to keep in mind, is that if we see a relatively early Boba ban, we're gonna see this set shine a little bit more, and we're gonna see a lot of those archetypes kind of like breathing a little bit more. Anyway, thank you so much for following that video, and you will see you next time for another video. And once again, if you like the video, please like and subscribe.